All right, so hello everyone, and thank you so much for joining for a curator's tour with Lisa Baldissera, who will be leading us through Griffin's current exhibition, William Kentridge, the Colander. So I'm just gonna go ahead and share my screen once again. I'd like to begin by acknowledging that Griffin Art Projects is situated on the traditional, ancestral, and unceded territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, and Stolo nations, and we are honored and grateful to undertake our work here. I also wanted to mention that if you would like to see live captions displayed for today's presentation, you can enable this by selecting CC Live Transcription at the bottom of your screen. And I always just mention that it's not perfectly accurate, and it tends to be trickier with names, so people names and place names, but we do hope that it is useful in capturing most of what we are saying today. And lastly, I wanted to mention that if for whatever reason you're experiencing any technical issues with the Zoom interface today, we'll also be live streaming our event on Griffin Art Project's Facebook page. And after my introductions, I'll go ahead and post that link in the chat as well. So you'll be able to follow on Facebook if for whatever reason you're experiencing issues on Zoom. Okay, so I'll just stop sharing my screen, and I just have a few quick notes before I pass the mic over to Lisa. So my name is Jazz Keeler, and I am the Contract Virtual Programs Curator with Griffin Art Projects. And today's tour with Lisa Baldissera, as I mentioned, brings us through Griffin's current exhibition, which is on display in the gallery from May 29th to September 4th, 2021. And before we begin, I'd like to mention that Griffin Art Projects would like to thank the Richmond Art Gallery, Presentation House, Fine Art Framing, Workshop Vancouver, and Polygon for the support of this exhibition. We'd also like to thank the North Vancouver Rec and Culture and the Griffin Foundation. And a special thanks goes out to Jillian Ross, as well as her partner Brendan Kobuseki, for all of their assistance in the exhibition coordination and assembly, as well as David Krut Projects and Vivian Meyer of VivianeArt Gallery in Calgary. And also a big thanks to Griffin Art Projects Public Programs and Outreach Coordinator Nathaniel Marchand for filming this tour. I also wanted to mention that because we are using Zoom's webinar format today, we cannot see or hear you, but please do get in touch with us using the chat at the bottom of your screen. And there'll also be time at the end for questions. So if at any point throughout the presentation, you have a question that pops into your head for Lisa, do feel free to write it out in the Q&A dialog box, which you'll notice is actually just separate from the chat, and we'll be checking there for the question period at the end. I'll also mention that we'd love to hear your voice, so if you'd like to ask your question out loud, you do have the opportunity to be unmuted, and so if that's your preference, just be sure to indicate that in the Q&A dialog box, or you can raise that little yellow virtual hand at the bottom of the screen. I'll just mention that today's presentation is being recorded, so if you do ask your question out loud, we'll just let you know that your voice will be captured in the audio recording of today's presentation. Okay, so that's all my notes, and I'm delighted to introduce Griffin's director, Lisa Baldissera. So Lisa has worked as an independent curator, consultant, and writer, and in curatorial roles in public art galleries in Western Canada since 1999, including senior curator at Contemporary Calgary from 2014 to 2016, and chief curator at the Mendel Art Gallery in Saskatoon from 2012 to 2014. Lisa was curator of contemporary art at the Art Gallery of Greater Victoria from 1999 to 2009, where she produced more than 50 exhibitions of local, Canadian, and international artists. Lisa holds MFAs in creative writing from UBC and MFA in art from the University of Saskatchewan. And Lisa recently completed a PhD at Goldsmith College, University of London. And Lisa has served on contemporary art juries across Canada, including the Canada Council for the Arts, the Saskatchewan Arts Board, the RBC Painting Competition, the Natition Foundation Visual Arts Awards, the Sobeys Art Award, the British Columbia Arts Council, and as a guest of the British Arts Council Outreach Program. Recent curatorial projects include Person Pausan for Griffin Art Projects, and in 2017, Utopia Factory, which considered issues of urban planning, monuments, public art, and reconciliation in the building of a new art gallery, and Wild, Fabricating a Frontier, which complicated frontier narratives in contested zones and settler colonial contexts. So thanks so much, Lisa, for your tour today, and I will pass it over to you.
Thank you so much, Jazz, and thank you everyone for attending today. And I hope you're all staying cool if you're in BC, and for the rest of you that you're staying cool too. I'm here in the middle of the exhibition and really thrilled to welcome you. We've pre-recorded a tour today and we'll be playing that shortly. But I also would just like to acknowledge that we are located at Griffin Art Projects on the traditional unceded ancestral territories of the Tsleil-Waututh, Squamish, Musqueam, and Stono nations, and we are grateful to be undertaking our work here. I also want to thank Jillian Ross, William Kentridge's master printer, without whom the project would not have been possible, without her enthusiasm, her ongoing commitment to her work and to William's work, and her support as a research and curatorial assistant throughout this process. It has just been an honor to work with her, and you will see a number of works from her collection and the work that she assembled while she was with us in February at Griffin Art Projects as part of her residency refugees. So we will have a look now at the exhibition, and I look forward to your questions afterwards. And thank you so much for being here.
Nathaniel, I'm just jumping on here as we're not hearing the sound. If you maybe try resharing and then just clicking the share sound.
Thank you so much for joining us here in William Kentridge, the Colander, which is held at Griffin Art Projects until September 4th. I'm delighted to walk you through the exhibition today and tell you a little bit about the curatorial pathway through this beautiful work by William Kentridge. The project began in 2012 with a fortuitous meeting with myself and Jillian Ross, William Kentridge's master printer, who also happens to be from Saskatchewan originally and spent 16 years with William Kentridge, working closely with him and working in the David Krut workshops in Johannesburg. As part of that 2012 meeting, at that time, Canada was going through the middle of its Truth and Reconciliation Commission, and I was very interested in what the passages were between the two countries and how this Truth and Reconciliation Commission, which was separated by 20 years, might have certain resonances and might also have certain variances. Canada's process, as we know, has been fraught, and equally fraught was South Africa's. William Kentridge's long history of critiquing bourgeoisie, white South African society under apartheid has been a marker of his work, as well as his critique of ideologies and certainties, particularly knowledge production and epistemologies that seem to create certainties under a history of enlightenment, which in the history of colonization have actually proven to fall away. This exhibition, although conceived under that condition, thinking about the Truth and Reconciliation Commissions, evolved over the last year and a half under this tremendous year that we've all been through, as we've seen certain forces of colonization fall away, and we've seen the discursive spaces open up once again to think through what remains and how great what remains is in terms of these processes. In thinking through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission process in Canada, ours also was almost an 8-year process. In South Africa's was about 7 years. And in each of these processes, a condition, a hope was arrived at. Kentridge's work is remarkable in the way that he deals with both hope and despair, with humor, absurdity, and ideological fissure. This particular project also is remarkable in that it is modest, and it returns us to the studio, and it returns us to Kentridge's studio during the period of COVID. The studio for Kentridge has been a constant and important part of his work. Although his work has been collaborative over the last year, Kentridge found alternate ways to work that were equally exciting, and we will walk through some of those today when we look at the work. We're going to start with this process here, which was uncovered through during the lockdown. The Center for the Less Good Idea is a think tank that is founded by Kentridge in Johannesburg, and it's an interdisciplinary hub for dance, music, theater, and visual arts. And what it does is allow a space for experimentation. It is called the Center for the Less Good Idea because it acknowledges the way in which there is a condition in the studio that allows for the provisionality and the uncertainty, but actually also opens up concerns of ideologies which fail. And so within the studio, there is a practice of embracing the unknown and embracing this kind of provisionality. We're going to show you 3 short films that were done by Kentridge during this period. All of the alumni were invited to participate in this process and submit short films. These 1-minute films show this process, show the studio process, and really open up quite vulnerably the way in which an artist might work, the way in which an artist might come to his ideas. And Kentridge allows us inside, a peek inside that studio process through these 1-minute films from the Center for the Less Good Idea.
Go 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 kuma go shwe go 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 kuma go shwe go 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 kuma go shwe go 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 kuma go
We're going to move to this Drawings for Projection series and also to studio life. The studio life process also allowed Kentridge within his studio to look at different ways of working with the still image. The other thing that distinguishes this particular project is its relationship to printmaking, and we were so lucky to have the generous loans of collectors from Vancouver, Regina, Edmonton, and also from Jillian Ross's own personal collection. And what we see in this particular series of prints from the Studio Life series, these photogravures show Kentridge in his studio working, and it almost functions as a stop motion animation, but we also see this process of pacing, which is a great part of his work, as he worked with animations, making minor adjustments to an image, back and forth, pacing and erasing. And this process of erasure is both part of the process of working with stop motion animation, creating thousands and thousands of images to create only a few short minutes of film. And it's an ongoing process of pacing and thinking in his studio. But it also reveals how the studio process works, and it reveals Kentridge himself as the figure here, and Kentridge as this solitary figure in his studio through lockdown. It also shows, like, once again, that stop motion animation through the different pieces as we see him move through these different gestures as he creates the work. This leads to the two films that are shown from the Drawings for Projection series. These films were created over 30 years apart from 1991. The first film is called Mine, and the second film, created just this last year from 2020, is called City Deep. The films themselves sort of bracket a history of Johannesburg, which is itself a kind of microcosm of a story of colonization and resource extraction. The mine is a gold mine, and the mine is also something that shows how the workers' lives and the infrastructure changes over time. So initially, the mine is from 1991, shows us Soho Eckstein, who is the ongoing protagonist in William Kentridge's Drawings for Projection series. And as he worked through this series, we see him explore different factions of life under apartheid. And as apartheid falls away, different factions of life as the post-apartheid conditions become apparent and have their own challenges. Within this film, we see this process of erasure again. Often one drawing is used over time. This erasure and this movement of sediment also reflects this kind of movement of sediment as the mining industry changed the landscape of Johannesburg. So in the initial mining phases, as the gold was extracted, there was a deep mining venture, which later gave way to the Zama Zama miners that worked on the surface of within the first 3 meters of the surface of the landscape. And these workers use their unsanctioned workers trying their luck. So Zama Zama literally means trying your luck in the landscape and trying to find a way to eke out a living. And as these miners work, and even as some of the operations worked to try and create an industry out of the sediment that was left of Johannesburg's over 150-year mining industry, which was the founding of Johannesburg, these miners find a way to survive. And as they survive, the landscape continues to change and becomes a kind of record of colonization. In this particular room, we find Triumphs and Laments and the Universal Archive. And one of the conditions that's really crucial to Kentridge's work is looking through the provisionality, again, of knowledge, the way that knowledge is produced, and really looking to the gaps in certainty as a place of generative thought. And this particularly unfolds in the studio, but it also unfolds in his process thinking through the history of Western thought. So he begins with Plato's Cave. And Plato's Cave, out of the Republic, Plato's Republic, tells us the story of prisoners who have been shackled and looking at shadows for their entire lives, so that the shadows become themselves a testament to reality. And when they are freed from their shackles and look at the real figures that are producing the shadows, sort of withdraw to the illusion and actually don't believe their eyes, don't believe the real figures because they're so unused to seeing them. Kentridge's use of shadow is really incredible in this particular room. We can see the prevalence of the way that this shadow figure is produced through brushwork. So we're going to look particularly at this Universal Archive series. And the Universal Archive is presented on a series of encyclopedias. The encyclopedias were a form that was derived in the Age of Enlightenment, and the encyclopedias in the late 1700s emerged out of Scotland. And these are, as Kentridge says, as they age out, as their information ages out, they're not redeemable. Unlike novels, which can have another life, the encyclopedia's information quickly becomes dated and discarded. So for this particular series, Kentridge used a series of encyclopedias that were sourced from all over the world. And Jillian told me a lot about that process of trying to find the right encyclopedias that would work for this series. And in the series, we see how the ink just sits up on that image like a shadow. As well, we see how each brushstroke transforms and changes slowly. So as Kentridge moves through these sort of quotidian kinds of subjects like coffee pots and birds and typewriters and trees, we see them slightly changing over time, much as the way that information and knowledge is translated and emerges and erodes and reforms over time. So the conceptual pairing of his process, once again, shows us the way that in which he interrogates systemic knowledges and tries to look at the foundation. And as he talks about the way that the Age of Enlightenment made way, this idea of Enlightenment knowledge and power also gave way to a kind of condition of permission for certain forms of violence in the name of Enlightenment. And so his project of interrogating that sort of unfolds over the different series that we see in this particular show. And the show combining the printmaking, which is also the origin of many of his works, and also forms a kind of storyboard for some of his film works. So rather than being sort of not, a sideline to his practice, is actually very central. And he's worked very collaboratively with Jillian throughout her work with him. We're going to just look at the Triumphs and Laments print that we have here. It's called Refugees. It's a diptych, and it is the last of this series, which was unfolded over a few years. And it's made of 77 different wood blocks, which are then torn and reassembled. In that tearing process, we see this, again, this idea of provisionality, so that the figures could be assembled and reassembled. It suggests the ways in which images are made that can be both opened up, torn apart, blown apart, and then reassembled into something that we call a certain form of evidence. So through this formal process of rupturing this kind of evidence, Kentridge shows us ways in which we might regard with suspicion and disruption what is presented to us. This particular work is derived from a number of processionals that Kentridge has used and looked at throughout his work, throughout his major installation work, processional plays a key role. The idea of triumphs and laments is that one person's triumph is another person's lament. One may be celebrating while another is despairing. The processional work is also based on the idea of processions such as Trajan's column in Rome, which shows the army and its celebrations and successes, at the same time as some of the figures of Rwandan refugees have also informed this work, documentation of their migration under duress. This work is based on a performance that Kentridge did in Rome along the Tiber River, where he sandblasted these figures, and there were over a 500-meter length of the wall. The figures are removed, so it's a subtractive process through sandblasting, where a outline, a shape, a stencil is placed, and then the sandblasting actually cleans the wall and leaves the figures. The figures actually made of the patina of the history, the sediment, once again coming into relationship here, showing us how that history continues to be present. In this section, we have an area that shows the process, shows us master printer Jillian Ross's process, the complexity of bringing together all of these sections, the kind of mapping that actually reflects her work as she replicates these images. And so as much as we've been able to see the openness and the provisionality and the ways in which the image is reconstructed, we also see the care in which Jillian has had to take this process, creating everything from deckled edge, recreating that deckled edge, to the pinning and every single minute detail of how Kentridge wanted these prints to look is executed through her care. It's a remarkable process, and it's a team of people that Jillian has led at David Krut workshops as well. And in all of our documentation, we've been able to, with Jillian's help, show who the team is made of and how collaborative this work actually is in producing these particular objects. I'm going to go now to the section that's just titled The Nose. And we're going to look at a series of prints. So we're showing just a few things that actually come out of a major work that was comprised of an opera, a set of prints, as well as an installation. So this is based on a Nikolai Gogol story called The Nose, which is an absurdist story about a low-level bureaucrat who wakes up one day to find his nose is missing and has gone for a walk. The nose continues to elude and escape him, in fact makes fun of him because the nose is now of a higher class than the bureaucrat. Through this process of making these works, Kentridge shows us the kind of absurdism that goes with the ideological fissures that emerge when a kind of epistemology takes hold. So the promise of the Russian constructivisms that was emerging, the promise of the Soviet realist film, and all of the remarkable impulses of the creative movements in Russia at this time were actually then overtaken by the regime. And as the regime during the 1930s sought to suppress people like Kazimir Malevich and Nel Listitsky, at the same time, the elements of the revolution remain as a kind of historical document. Within these prints, we see certain figures and certain forms of erasure kind of noted. So this particular work, Bad Disguises 2, references the ways in which those that fell out of favor with the regime were removed from documentation. So for example, Trotsky is missing in all of the photographs, but this would have had to have been done by hand. So it's hand scratched. There's a hand removal, which also kind of represents a certain, in an interesting way, the ways in which the scratching of the plate also can perform this function in printmaking processes. So this hand removal of those who no longer are in favor also shows us something a little bit about the background of Kentridge's own practice, where in the 70s he also was involved early on in his career with political posters, working with student movements, and creating his own form of resistance work in printmaking. We also see an example of the way that a mask is used, and because we are all working with masks these days, I wanted to just point this out. This is also called Bad Disguises 1. And the reason that Kentridge focused on this was that the mask is a site of immobility on the face, which makes us pay even greater attention to the mobility of the rest of the face and to read it with greater intensity. And it also withdraws or withholds certain information, which can then be revealed later. There are, as part of this work, the Nose Opera that was produced by the Met in 2010 also formed a installation work. And the installation work was composed of 6-minute fragments. These films, such as this one, which show a Sisyphean task of climbing and falling, the kind of circular task of this closed circuit of a knowledge, a fixed form of knowledge, which Kentridge makes fun of in this sort of absurdist video. Theme continues in this project that is also included in the exhibition, which is called What Will Come Has Already Come, again referring to that kind of circular, the repetition of history and the revisiting of history. And in that work, which is called What Will Come Has Already Come, is also a series of prints that form a kind of storyboard and feature some of the motifs that are actually in the installation itself. So we see a number of these, again, from master printer Jillian Ross's collection, key motifs that come out of this work. The work itself combines the sounds of a fair and with the sounds of Mussolini's favorite marching song to show images of the Algerian War, a colonizing war with Italy, and the act of trying to overthrow that regime. These particular images show how a kind of battle map might give way to another form of information, a newspaper, and a mechanism, a gas mask, that finds its own way. The gas mask also looks very much like an instrument of measure that is used to both navigate map making, but also is used as tools of measure for testing and confirming certain epistemologies as well. And we also see another work in the exhibition, which is a really unique work called Wadeville. This work is not the source for any film, but is a standalone work. And the work itself is comprised of a number of structural failures. And the first one I'm going to point out is the colander in the left-hand corner. The colander is what is the figure for which the exhibition is named. And the colander is itself this kind of absurd mechanism which is built to never hold water. It is a structure that is built to fail in one task while it succeeds in another. And as a kind of a motif for the ways in which closed knowledge systems under the Enlightenment also formed these conditions for failure despite their ideas of enlightenment, of movement and progression. And so what we see is progression that has been stopped, the end of a road that will not allow you to continue in the landscape for no apparent reason. We see a bridge that has given way to undergrowth and what may be a kind of chemical residue along the horizon. So we see this kind of Johannesburg landscape that is one that does not have a feature of a key river or lake or an ocean. So in that sense, it's not it's not created by the usual forms that would have created a city, but instead is created by this movement of land under the mining industry, and this disruption that such industries and such movements can cause. At the same time as showing the ways in which more abstract structures, more abstract and political structures can also fail to undergo or to deliver what they intended to. We're going to move just to the Sybil area and also to the back of the room. Sybil is the film installation, and we have a number of figures as well. So we're going to look particularly at this piece called Reeds. And we're going to look at Reeds, which is a piece that shows, it's actually extracted from a book for explorers. And so what it was it's a corner of an image of an engraving that would have been produced based on drawings that early explorers to Africa produced. And these drawings were meant to show the people back home, in this case in London, what was actually going on. They were a record of the exploration. And in this particular image, we just see a corner of that work. And we also see the kind of sight lines, the red sight lines that we would see in the explorer's telescope, as well as the red lines also show a kind of registration mark as they would with a printmaking process. And so they're meant to be sort of lines to orient the viewer, to orient the gaze through the telescope. These engravings, when they were returned back to London, became the source of imagining what Africa might be, and then were once again returned to Africa, but now instead of as drawings that the explorers had made, as engravings that were imagined in a process of translation by these faraway engravers. And so an image of Africa is returned to itself, an incomplete image is returned to itself in these 19th century tracks and 18th century tracks, which document the process of colonization. On this wall, we also see a series of figures and studies, and they show some of the main motifs, some of the key images of Kentridge's work. They're interesting in the sense that not only for their mastery of printmaking, but also for the ways in which they single out certain symbols and figures for further contemplation and show the individual in a space of contemplation, in a space of thinking through, and a space where each individual is a subject within these greater superstructures, a subject with will and desire. Some of the works are also emblematic of certain elements such as the rhinoceros, which stands in for Africa in this sense. And the rhinoceros appears in a number of films, often in miniature. It also appears in the mine film that we saw earlier, and shows us a kind of figure for a kind of constrained and mighty being. When we look at this particular work, the 8 Vessels work, this is quite an amazing process. This work was done over the course of the pandemic, and there's been a kind of call and answer with Jillian Ross, who's working here in Canada. And the work has been sent back and forth as William and Jillian work out the process of its making. It also calls back to certain works that have inspired Kentridge, including Mondrian's, including Morandi's very modest paintings. These works show the way that which contemplation, even over the most modest domestic emblems, can become a place of opening up knowledge, thinking, and meditation. The fact that the work becomes, despite the modesty of its subject matter, a kind of haunting, elegiac work shows us the capacity for the stillness of the studio, for the space of the studio to also embrace the world. That the studio becomes a kind of universe in itself for contemplation. And that despite the stricture that Kentridge experienced during this last year, the studio was also an incredibly generative space for him as he worked through and returned to some of these motifs and deepened his engagement with them once again. This work here shows some of these small figures, some of these coffee pots against the backdrop of one of the images from the City Deep series of films, of the City Deep film itself. And this is the Phillips Room, which is one of the rooms in the Johannesburg Art Gallery. The Phillips Room is named for one of the families who benefited from the industry greatly. And it was a kind of way of giving back to the community and to offset some of the effects of that extraction. And so it was a sense of trying to make up for, or at least trying to stave off the response to this relationship of extraction to the landscape. This is a gift that was given in the late 19th century to the Johannesburg Art Gallery, which itself is now undergoing great change as it also suffers in terms of its own lack of care in the current moment. So the Johannesburg Art Gallery is going through significant disruption and attempting to recover from this through its own challenges for funding and support. In this area, we'll see the film Sybil. And Sybil is a short film that's based on an opera called Waiting for the Sybil that was produced in 2019. The Sybil figure is a figure that is a soothsayer. Sybil is a figure who can tell your future. And if you visit her, you will have it written on a leaf. And unfortunately, as she's handing the leaves out for your future, for a story of your future, you will also see that the wind takes these leaves and scatters them. And the scattering of the leaves testifies to the fate that will never be known. And so this kind of provisionality revisits us once again as we think about Kentridge's work in the figure of Sybil. The figure of Sybil is also the backdrop of the figure is the encyclopedia once again. And as we see these thousands of pages shift by and the monumental task of attempting to account for certain forms of history, attempting to shift certain forms of knowledge, Kentridge's painting and moving figures on this backdrop give us an opening and a shadow once again, which opens up and shows us the opposite side of this acquisition, this attempt to understand and to know, and opens up a gap or a space which is so essential in the studio practice and so essential in political life, to open up a gap or a space of unknowing or not knowing, which Kentridge's work often gestures toward. In this work, that was also a preparation for an opera, we can see, and we'll end with just a short section that shows us how the beginning of these kinds of large operatic works happens in Kentridge Studio. And this is before COVID, so we'll just see just a very brief clip where you can see how the beginning of this workshopping process, how open-ended it is, how much of a call and response it is. And so this kind of faith in that open-ended process of creative work of the studio is a testament once again to a kind of faith in not knowing, in failure, in accident, and in the ruptures of uncertainty. I look forward to talking with you and hearing your questions after the talk, and thank you so much for spending this time with us.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Lisa. That was incredible. Thank you for leading us through the exhibition so eloquently and in such an engaging way. It was so amazing. You really got the sense that you were in the space and walking around with you. So thank you. And thanks, Nathaniel, for your amazing filming. That was just so wonderful.
Huge thanks to Nathaniel. And thank you so much, Jazz, as well, for your coordination.
Wonderful. So we'll open it up to questions. As I mentioned, if you do have a question, feel free to indicate it in the Q&A, which again is just separate. It's to the left of the chat, and we'll be checking there. Or if you'd like to ask your question out loud, you can raise that little yellow virtual hand, and we can give you the ability to unmute your microphone as well. And perhaps while we wait for any questions to stroll in, if you need a moment to think about it, I thought I'd also just use this moment for a little plug, because we do have some really exciting public programming coming up, and it would be great to let you know about it. So the Worldings Virtual Conference is planned for July 9th, 10th, and 11th, but we have a preview event next Sunday, July 4th, which will be moderated by Karen Tam, and our preview event is titled Imperfect Constellations. But we have a really amazing lineup. It's a full preview event, but then followed by a full weekend of talks and panels. We're offering it, I should mention right at the top, we're offering it in partnership with the Urban Shaman, which is an Indigenous artist-run center in Winnipeg. And it's also offered with collaborative support from the Center for the Less Good Idea and Bag Factory in Johannesburg, as well as the MAP department at the University of Regina. So we have a really exciting lineup of panels and speakers, and we do hope that you're able to join us. And I'll actually just put a link to the information on our website in the chat for anyone who might be interested. There we go. Oh, and it does look like we have a couple of virtual hands raised. So Lamb, if you would like to ask a question, you should be able to unmute yourself.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, hi, Lamb.
Oh, hi, Jeff. Hi, Lisa. Well, thank you for putting this together. I have seen the show. It's remarkably beautiful, as I mentioned in the chat room. And yeah, thank you so much again for your insights and walking us through the process. My question is, just recently, I think it's last couple of days with all the residential school and happening in Canada is going on. I have read something about the apartheid South Africa was actually importing Canadians' apartheid policies when they first kind of started it there. I wonder if you have heard anything about that side of history, and also maybe commenting on the difference in terms of characteristics and also development of the process about apartheid South African and also apartheid Canada, and what kind of difference would you see in and how are we moving forward in terms of resistance kind of thing?
Thank you, Lam. It's such a wonderful question, important question. And of course, over the last 10 days, the sharpening of this unfinished work of the TRC process in Canada just comes into too sharp relief for all of us. and the work continues, as we know. Although I will not say I'm an expert on the South African process, I would say that one of the things that was a couple of features, it was established under Mandela, under his new government in 1995, and one of the problems was that it was intended, they were empowered to provide amnesty, but they were not empowered in the same way to implement reparations. And so one of the pieces of unfinished business, because the focus was information and evidence over prosecution for past crimes in that case, so it marked the end of 300 years of colonial rule, and a whole shift started in 1990 when declared end of the banning of the liberation movements. Mandela was released, and the state of emergency was lifted. So there were all kinds of things that gave, that were very profound ruptures, because that was the beginning of the end of an apartheid, a particular apartheid regime. And with our process, as we know, we have yet to implement so many of the recommendations of the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, although those promises were made. And so they remain in this unfinished state. As David Garneau points out so eloquently in the process, even the term reconciliation is fraught because it implies that there was some conciliatory relationship at the beginning. And he argues that that never existed. So reconciliation is in fact a term that is not accurate. Similarly, in the work of Fala Ofala, who we'll hear from in the Worldings Conference, who is a theater director and actor who will be speaking on behalf of the Center for the Less Good Idea, he problematizes the idea of the term decolonization because of its centering of the word colonization. And so that just that prefix still allows the word colonization to dominate the discussion, and so that any action or gesture is always in response to it as a dominant mode, as though there was nothing before it. And so I think that those are really important references that both David and Fala Ofala make in terms of the work of decentering that colonization, the work of decentering even that sense of historical record, as Kentridge does so well in working to live with fragmentation instead of closure, which seems to be, what we see when there's a problem is that people are racing toward a closure when the inquiry hasn't even begun.
Thank you so much, Lisa. And thank you, Lam, for your question as well. We have some questions. We have a question from Liz, and Liz, you should be able to unmute yourself. And Lisa, I'll just mention, we had an audience member who's wondering if you might just get a little closer to your laptop, just for volume, but thank you.
Hi, this is not a question. It's actually just to say thank you so much. That tour was just fabulous, and the show is unbelievable. I'm just, and timely, my God, for all Canadians. And I really hope to God that show travels so that many, many more people can see it. I don't know if we'll make it there, but just wanted to say thank you so much. You've done a terrific job. It looks like an amazing exhibition, and a real feat to have pulled it together.
Thank you so much. And as I said, we could not have done it without Jillian Ross, who was our coordinator and worked with the Kentridge Studio so closely to make sure that we could do this work. And it's really a collaborative process, and thank you so much.
Yeah, and Jillian too, and I assume Brendan worked on the installation as well, did he?
Yes, he worked with us on
design. So beautifully installed too, so congratulations to you all.
It was completely insightful too. It opened up a lot of different viewpoints and it opened up a lot of the things we had never considered. It's fabulous. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Amazing. So we have a few questions for you waiting in the Q&A, Lisa. So I'll go ahead and I will read them out to you. So first question starts off with amazing tour and beautiful show. What were some of the challenges of bringing all these different elements together?
Well, it was really interesting because we're working with 3,000 square feet, and as any of us who love Kentridge's work know, we've seen the amazing immersive large-scale installations. So one of the challenges was to really get a sense of the fulsome nature of the work, but to do it differently than that kind of project. And so I think the challenge was to be referencing so many major works that took so many years to do, and to try and somehow do them justice. So we refer to quite a number of series in the exhibition, all of them in conversation with each other, and kind of opening up this discursive space further in a new direction, or within a different and new historical situation. So that the challenge was really to create enough space for everyone to be able to see and feel each of those in a resonant way, to be able to sit with them in a resonant way. And of course, the technical challenges of having a number of different sound sources, and ensuring that that these worked together well, just on a formal consideration of the exhibition. One of our major challenges was actually bringing the refugees print, and we were so lucky because Jillian was game to do this with us, in which we shipped the print over. Actually, this is the largest book in the exhibition, and it was shipped over ready to be assembled, but not assembled. So in its 77 layers. And then Jillian was with us in February to actually assemble that work and frame it so that it could be here. So we were able to ship it from Johannesburg, which would not have been possible if we hadn't been able to do that. So.
Thanks so much, Lisa. We have 2 or 3 questions that all center on the same theme, so I'll try to kind of summarize them here for you. And I know you answered it in response to Lamb's question, which ties in quite nicely as well. But our audience members are wondering, in the light of the current climate in Canada, if you could speak a little bit further about the connection between Canada and South Africa in terms of the process of reconciliation with their colonial past. And in addition to that, an attendee is wondering if Jillian and William ever spoke of comparing South Africa and Canada's colonial histories.
That's interesting. I'm not sure. I'm sure that over their 16-year relationship, there probably has been moments where through the discoveries of the work, they've had that conversation. And I'm not sure if Jillian's with us, but she may want to answer. In terms of the 2 spaces, there is a danger of trying to elide these 2 very different historical moments, and that's not the intention of the show. It is to reflect, in fact, on some of the differences where the TRC in South Africa was intended to be somewhat cathartic, and that there was a kind of catharsis. Our process was, definitely focused on a specific incident, the residential schools, and a specific history, and also had there was an element of gathering records. There were 6,500 witnesses, and most of the energy was toward opening up and gathering records, for the government to open up its records. And as we know, the Catholic Church has been reluctant to open up its own records. And so we know that that is an incomplete project. So in a sense, it was a model, and it was one model, and it was the beginning of that TRC model. And interestingly, unlike the post-war models and the Nuremberg trials, which actually were about finding justice, these models have been more focused on that finding documentation where documentation was missing, and have not had the same kind of focus on the restitution and the reparation. And in South Africa, I sense from what I've been reading and researching is that has been one of the problems that has continued to be contended with after that process.
Thanks so much, Lisa. I'm gonna jump off back on here again just to say thank you. My mind is still turning just from your tour and all of the rich information and visuals that accompanied it. So thank you again, and a huge thank you to everyone who took the time to join us today. And we do hope to see you again at our future public programs. Be sure to check out the World Inks virtual program, as well as if you're in the Vancouver area, we hope that you stop by the gallery. Griffin is now open Fridays to Sundays from noon to 5 p.m. So I believe we are still asking people to make bookings online in advance. So you can do that on our website. Is that correct, Lisa? Yes. Okay, perfect. So you can make bookings online at Griffin Art Project's website. And yeah, we hope to see everybody again soon, and enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
Thank you so much, Jazz. Thanks.
Thanks, everyone. Thanks, Lisa.